So I'm very excited about this conversation. I've wanted to show it to you guys since the end of last week. This is from Vivek Ramaswamy. If you don't know him, he was running for president for the Republican Party. Didn't make the cut because of Trump. People are too loyal to him, but he'll probably be a part of the administration when Trump wins here in November. Balaji, it looks like a lunatic. He's on the right. He's a prophet. He's a very, very, very smart man, affiliated with the tech sector, affiliated with the bio industry. He's so brilliant. What I love, so they're going to be talking about regulation. They're going to be talking about the FDA. They're going to be talking about a bunch of different organizations and how things have been in the past. Because for the FDA, Balaji, I think, was supposed to join and potentially help run that, but didn't. And he went down another path because he didn't think the timing was right. Well, I think in this next administration, the timing will definitely be right. But the dialogue that these guys have, the content and subject matter that they cover, and then, this is going to be, I think it's going to be a series of podcasts or YouTube videos that these guys will end up going over. Just breaking down these all the different conversations that occur inside of this. It's amazing. Good morning, Scott. Good morning, Arpan. I hope you guys are doing well. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started because this one's 57 minutes. They cover a lot of stuff. I'll interject every once in a while when I feel like it's needed. Love you guys.
Conversation for a while. This is a conversation with a guy who I first heard of when he was rumored to be in the running for head of the FDA under Trump in his first term, which caught my attention because I was in biotech back then. And the more I got to know about him, the more I realized that we had some similarities in our not only our backgrounds, but our paths and some of our interests, even if we have different views at times. Balaji Srinivasan, welcome to the podcast, man.
Good to be here, Vic.
So I think this will be certainly the longest conversation we've had. We've only started really speaking even over the course of the last year or year and a half. But I've known about you indirectly through folks in Silicon Valley, all of whom point to you as some type of oracle figure, which got me intrigued by you. But tell me what got you, potentially, at least whether you were considering it or not, I don't know, although I'd be interested. Were you actually considering being head of the FDA? But what got you to the point of even being in the running to be head of the FDA? And more generally, maybe a little bit of background for the listeners who may not be as familiar with your background as most of Silicon Valley is.
Sure. So, first I want to say, game recognized game. I think there's a lot of mutual respect between us. I actually think we have very similar backgrounds. I think both, born to Indian immigrant parents who, believe in the American dream. I went to the West Coast. I think you went to school on the East Coast. Also actually had a biotech background. Very briefly, I got my BS, MS, PhD at Stanford in electrical engineering, MS in chemical engineering. Then I taught computer science and stats there for a few years with a specialty in computational genomics and bioinformatics. Founded a genomics company, like genome sequencing, like clinical genomics. Teal actually was an investor through Founders Fund, and so that's how I got to know them. That was later sold for $375 million. I became an angel investor, early investor in a lot of biotech, but also crypto and other software stuff. Also even actually government innovation, OpenGov. I'm not sure if you know that was recently sold for a few $1 billion. Became a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, largest VC firm in the world. Then CTO of Coinbase, largest American crypto exchange. And then recently—
I didn't know you were the CTO of Coinbase.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Okay. CTO.
Yeah. Interesting.
So did a few things. And then most recently, best-selling author and Twitter personality. And so very similar career track to you, actually, in many ways. Also finance, biotech, authoring, social media, and in a sense, politics. But from the same Indian immigrant background. But parallel paths with you, I think slightly more of an East Coast institutionalist path, and me maybe more of a West Coast path, but with a lot of similarities.
Yeah, cool. And your parents, what did they do when they came to this country? Actually, it was interesting to trace
physicians.
Both of them.
Yeah.
Cool. So anyway,
my father grew up in a very poor village and so on and so forth, and so came out to the U.S. for opportunities. So that was a big part of it.
We definitely share that in common. My father was from a rural village in Kerala, southern India, probably not far from where your father came from.
Not far from mine.
Judging from your last name.
Yes. So we're from Tamil Nadu, but basically, nearby. Yep.
Yeah. So were you considering actually becoming the head of the FDA?
So the FDA thing, right?
Was that actually a serious thing?
So context of that was, so I had that biotech background, right? But I'd also actually written a bunch of lectures. I taught a class in 2013, actually. Here, I'll put up the URL. And there was some good stuff in it. Basically, it was a course. Part of it was a Bitcoin crowdfunding site, and that was actually relatively early in cryptocurrency. It was 2013 when Bitcoin is in single digits. But another huge part of it was about the regulatory state. Okay. Because even back then, so I taught this with my friend Vijay Pandey, who later became the head of A16Z Bio. I recruited him there, and that's like a multi-billion-dollar thing that invests in a lot of biotech stuff. And so we had an interest in basically educating people from around the world for free And one of the things that I learned in my time in biotech, and you also, I'm sure, learned this, is the degree to which the regulatory state holds back innovation.
Yep.
And that understates it, right? We're talking about 1,000x ratios in terms of cost, in terms of the quality of healthcare people could get. People don't understand the scale of it, right?
1,000x, 1,000x. So he's talking about the level of suppression from innovation here in this space is massive in scale.
And show graphs like this thing called Irum's law that you might be familiar with. Do you know what that is? Have you heard that term, Irum's law? Oh, okay. So Irum's law is this amazing graph which shows that basically
it's like the backwards of Moore's law. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. Irum's law. Okay, right.
That's right. And it shows that despite all the technological progress we've had in computers, some force has been not just holding it back, but reversing it in drug development, which is part of the reason that drugs have gotten so expensive. Irum's law is Moore's law spelled backwards. If you go and search that, you'll see that the cost of drug development has actually increased by multiple orders of magnitude, like more than 1,000x since the advent of the FDA.
Sure.
Which is part of the reason that everything is so expensive. That's just one very quantifiable metric, but lots of other things in healthcare have just risen through the roof. At the same time, the cost of all the information.
Can you imagine if this man becomes head of the FDA in this next administration, and you have people like Vivek Ramaswamy, you have people like Elon Musk, you have people like Robert F. Kennedy, you have people like J.D. Vance, all looking to reduce regulation and the power of the federal government. Can you imagine what is capable in the medical industry, in the biotech industry? Can you imagine what happens to investment containers like Arc Genomics? Can you imagine this?
Information has dropped through the floor. Something is broken there. And I can again tell the details, but net is I wrote a series of lectures at the Stanford course. It had 250,000 students, and it was online. And a bunch of venture capitalists saw it, and like Keith Rabois saw it, and at Founders Fund, and other folks who are mutual friends of ours. And I think other folks at Founders Fund, including Teal, saw it. And so basically, all of that plus the fact that I actually built a biotech company was what led to the whole FDA thing in late 2016. And the thing is, I was at the time turning around a crypto company, and I had a loyalty to my investors and people there. I eventually successfully turned around and sold to Coinbase. And so the call from Teal came in late 2016, like December 2016. And so, net without, I don't want to like quote kiss and tell or whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
But net, I could have been number 2 at FDA. I was offered deputy commissioner, but I ultimately decided not to do that. And for a variety of reasons, but I think that gets back to, you and I have a lot of similarities, but I think I'm on the margins. I'm more Mr. Outside and you're more Mr. Inside, which is fine. They're complementary strategies, right? You kind of need both. Like, for example, Google couldn't have reformed Microsoft by, having Sergey and Larry join Microsoft at the beginning, but by building something amazing on the outside, they sort of forced Microsoft to reform.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I'll say, even in the national sense, I mean, you're talking to me from Singapore, right? And I think you're I'm very much a pro-nation person, and you're more of a post-nation person, which will
we should talk about that. Yes.
Which will absolutely, which will actually come back to just on the FDA piece of this, because this is actually related. There's just a couple of things going on in the news that are actually relevant to things that you and I are talking about right now. There was a recent FDA rejection of a therapy that had achieved, on its own self-described terms, 2 successful phase 3 studies, an MDMA-based therapy for a condition known as, of course, PTSD. You'll be familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder. And they went through and they designed the phase 3 trials exactly as it appears the FDA told them to design the trials. But it came before, and it relates to exactly the rise of bureaucracy. One of these things that's called an advisory committee. The FDA frequently holds these advisory committees where they have experts that supposedly opine on the data and tell them, what they should or shouldn't do. The FDA is not bound by their recommendations, usually follows them, sometimes doesn't. Interesting as well. Now, in my experience, and I've seen the industry evolve for a long time, I was a biotech investor, as you know, I've built companies in the industry. What the FDA actually does is they'll often just use these advisory committees as a cover for what they otherwise want to do.
Do what they actually want to do.
Yeah, do what they actually want to do, and the whole thing is stacked from the beginning. So I'm a big believer in being driven by hard facts. I have sat in the Hilton Hotel in places like Maryland, in the middle of nowhere outside Washington D.C. for.
Real quickly, I wanted to just add. There are over I think it's 1,800 plus per Theo Von in the Trump interview that we just listened to, or I listened to yesterday. 1,800 plus lobbyists in the healthcare sector in Washington, D.C. So when he talks about them trying to establish control and having advisory councils that basically make the decisions on whether or not something can proceed ahead or not, there's heavy vested interest from the existing system and and big pharma to be able to decide whether or not something can proceed ahead. This is the kind of stuff we need to get rid of. If this goes away, you will see companies like or investments like Arc Genomics explode into this new year. This is one of my plays. This is why I'm bringing this up now, guys, because this with the multiplier that you can get off an options contract for 2026 for ARC-G, and then the political environment and what could be happening between now and November, and then the deregulation that comes after, people will start to speculate. Knowing about these interviews, rich and powerful people will start to speculate in investment vehicles before other people start to think about it, and we'll get in early, and then you'll see the narrative change dramatically. And when you think about something like Arc Genomics, I just want to pull it up real quick and show you how depressed and horribly destroyed this has been. It has been 1,330 days almost that we've been away from the last all-time high. And this thing right now, even today, even up 1.26% again today, is still down almost 77% in the last 3.5 years. So this is something that has a lot of ability to run, and even 100% increase in price would make me 10x that amount. So I could make 1.5 million, 2 million off of Arc Genomics if they just get up near the 200 moving average. So this is an investment that I'm very excited about, and it's one of the reasons why I'm very excited about this conversation, on top of all the benefits that Americans get to receive if we do a better job deregulating the FDA and a lot of the crap that's going on in our government.
8-hour versions of these. I'd be sitting in the front row of these advisory committees taking detailed notes. I mean, that was the level in which I was immersed in this industry. And so I did not do that, admittedly, for this most recent advisory committee. But it smells a lot like a situation where the FDA served up what they called their briefing document to the advisory committee, which the advisory committee then opines on. Think of themselves as a bunch of experts who are actually just being wielded as pawns by the FDA. I've seen that happen before, and it smells like a situation where that might have happened here, where the advisory committee then recommended against the approval of this drug, which is exactly what the FDA came around to do. I view that as a bit of a travesty for a number of reasons. First of all, there's patients suffering from PTSD with very few options. But the basis for denying this approval was particularly fascinating, Balaji, and you'll be at a level where you can easily follow this. So they say the trial was functionally unblinded. So usually the way you're supposed to do this is you have placebo, you have the drug, patients don't know which one you're getting, so that the therapeutic effect is actually a real effect rather than a placebo effect, where the patient believes they're getting the drug, but they're not actually getting the drug, they're getting placebo. If they're blinded, the patient doesn't know which one, and then you look at the trial, the end of the trial, what they call the end point, that's the time at which the final measures are taken, and see how the drug performed.
This first part is just talking about, again, backgrounds and trying to understand it. We're almost done with it, and then we'll jump into MD and MA and the FDA, and then we'll talk about the island hopping campaign and an ideal world without the FDA. So we'll get into a lot of the really good stuff. It's great conversation, and this backstory helps.
Relative to placebo. The FDA claimed here that actually the patients knew whether they were on drug or placebo, but not because the trial was misconducted, but because certain of the patients experienced euphoria, which is a side effect, so-called side effect, at least of MDMA-based therapy, and therefore patients would know whether they were on drug or placebo, and therefore could have a placebo effect that could have driven their treatment of PTSD, completely ignoring the possibility that the euphoria was part of the very mechanistic behavior of the drug that might have had an impact on actually treating PTSD itself, which is part of the hypothesis in the first place of using an MDMA-based therapy for the treatment of PTSD. And worst of all, the FDA would have predicted this. Anybody knowledgeable at the FDA around the development of this program would have known that was going to be a side effect of an MDMA-based therapy for PTSD before they agreed on a phase 3 protocol that, to your point on Eroom's law, added tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in development costs to a program like this one.
It is insane, and Trump's done some things too to help with drugs that can save lives that were impossible to get through in the United States, and that were even approved in Europe, of all places, one of the most regulated places on earth. But we couldn't get him here in the States, and he basically helped push laws that would allow people to be able to say, I understand the risks, I'm willing to die, I want to try this to see if it can save me. And got that stuff pushed through. That's the kind of stuff we need. We need holes through bureaucracy where we don't deal with all this insanity and like all these different phases and all these things that can slow down the medical system. It's really just a matter of of needing to do due diligence, being clear on it, and then also offering people, especially in life-saving needs, the opportunity to be able to say, hey, this might not work out right. We think it's going to be really good. Here's all the data we have. Here's what we think the chance of success is. But if you die, you can't sue us, bro. And just let people accept liability for these things so that we can increase innovation and move forward. I think that's, if somebody wants to be a guinea pig in order to survive another day, give them the opportunity to do that.
And yet, all the public reads, I read the articles on this, even the so-called scientific press, which at least in the world of biotech is a joke, actually just reports this.
Thank you, Nikki. It's called right to try. That's the thing that Trump was in support of.
Saying that there were certain trial irregularities because it's just it was an unblinding issue. So it's not an issue relating to cost and benefits of the therapy, but it's just that the trial might have been unblinded along the way, as though there was somebody who was actually peeking behind the veil and telling patients whether they were on drug or placebo. That's what the public is left with, without knowing that this alleged unblinding was a functional unblinding relating to the actual therapeutic properties of the investigational drug, which the FDA knew about and signed off on before they got cold feet and probably served up to an advisory committee a bunch of briefing documents that got that committee to be the ones that said, hey, it's just the experts that told us we shouldn't approve this, therefore we're not. A lot of detail there, but it does lift the curtain on how this bureaucratic machine operates. And that's also just a really long way of saying, dude, I'm pretty pissed at you for not taking that job as deputy commissioner, okay? Because we need people who are willing to cut through that otherwise smoke of bureaucratic techno talk, which is actually just a normative agenda, often masquerading in the guise of technocracy and scientific expertise. And I just think it was Lykos Therapeutic. I have no connection to that company, no vested interest in it. Actually, I think that if J&J, by the way, which got esketamine approved for depression, the ketamine derivative for ketamine, really ketamine period, basically. Esketamine is just one of the enantiomers of ketamine. They got it approved for depression on far thinner data than I believe this company had for its MDMA-based therapy for PTSD. If this had been J&J, likely the same sponsor playing the managerial game the way that larger pharma companies do, I have high degree of confidence that this would be an approved drug right now, but it's not. But anyway, a little bit of a rant on the news of the week, and I just shared the details because I know you weren't necessarily following this particular case. But I thought it's an interesting validation, as you see on an almost monthly basis with the FDA, of this unelected bureaucracy impeding innovation and really foisting cost onto a healthcare system that actually could use a step in the other direction rather than in the direction that drives up more health cost.
First of all, I love this, and we should probably do, like, how much time you got? We should do.
I love Balaji. He's like, I want to have this conversation. You're smart. You're somebody I can talk to.
Do a biotech podcast or something at some point, because I actually feel we could kind of, knock the ball back and forth for hours and hours. But let me give a quick version.
And the public deserves to know it. Is the
absolutely,
because it's not just technical mumbo jumbo talk. It's in the details that you actually see how corrupt the system really is.
Absolutely, and I actually think with if we I don't know, if we prepared and we did 20 hours on this and went through a bunch of issues with your knowledge on the therapeutic side and maybe mine on the other side. But let me give my quick reactions on this specific, right? Okay. So there's kind of like three sort of separate prongs there, okay? There's like FDA's behavior itself, and just what it is as an organization. There's how we should test drugs in the abstract if FDA didn't exist. And then there's also like what the, whether I should have taken the thing in 2016 and what have you, right? Let me deal with these in a, just different order, right? So, have you ever had, the scenario of you've got a jar of peanut butter and you unscrewed a bit, but you can't fully open it, but you hand it to someone else and you loosened it for them, and it's like a relay race or what have you, or vice versa?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So I think, or for example, in World War II, like the, Americans versus Japanese, there's an island hopping campaign where they took certain islands in a particular sequence and they couldn't have just gone straight to the home islands. They had to do them in a certain order. In the same way, I don't believe that a frontal assault on FDA in 2016 would have been feasible. I think the entire...
This is a really cool part. This is where he's letting you know, like, hey, this is why I didn't join the FDA or any of these organizations, and why I believe it's going to be better in the future. This is a really good part. Listen to this.
Country and world had to go through the last 8 years, and what happened over that time? Well, first, there was the true build out of social media and then Elon taking over X, which actually gave a media that's upstream of FDA and actually can do investigations into FDA, which is completely new. That's within the last 2 years, and it's still having its consequences being felt. Number two is I think you had to have many people in technology and finance both make billions of dollars in regulated spaces, specifically Uber, Airbnb, crypto, fintech, right? And to some extent, biotech. And then also see many more billions of dollars thwarted and destroyed by arbitrary acts of regulators, which gave a financial interest both upside and downside for really paying attention to the details of regulation. Whereas before 2010, it was really taboo to even question whether a regulator could be bad, right? Third, you had to see, I think, I gave a talk 10 years ago where I identified the island hopping campaign, in fact. And I think it started with local digital. For example, Google going after Google News, and various establishment strongholds getting disrupted, local digital. Then you have local physical, which is Uber versus taxi regulations, Airbnb versus hotel regulations, is going after physical things, taxis and hotels, but they're locally regulated. Then you have federal digital, which is crypto, Bitcoin versus the SEC, right? And that's an ongoing battle now. And then after that is won, and we're on the cusp of winning that, hopefully, knock on wood. In some ways, we have won parts of it where, Bitcoin ETF has been approved, ETH ETF has been approved, even Kamala Harris is signaling Harris for crypto, even though that's a lie, right? That is the
tell the truth.
There's a saying, the tribute that vice pays to virtue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
That shows that at least they have to give lip service to it. In the same way, the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea has to pretend it's democratic, right?
Understood.
Okay,
Yep.
right. And so then
it's a marker of, at least it's a milestone.
It's a milestone. It's a milestone. At least they need to fake it. They know that they can't declare anti-crypto army because that's a vote and money loser for them. Okay. So,
right.
So then the next level, and we're also fighting that, by the way, on social media. So the federal digital is versus the AI ban. It's on the social media bans. These are new regulatory agencies that are trying to stand up, right? And the final frontier is federal physical. And I think actually drugs will come first, and then energy and transportation are the very hardest and they're last. And the reason for that is drugs can be, food, drugs, biotech, that can be reduced to individual, my body, my choice type arguments, right? Whereas the energy and transportation, if it blows up, then it affects people in an area. So you need to actually...
Let's just start with the my drugs, my body, my choice, right?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, Balaji is one of the most intelligent people on this planet. I'm gonna dive in hard to this guy in understanding everything he has to offer and his thoughts on the entirety of the world and every book that he's written in the month ahead. I'm going to be spending a lot of time with Balaji because I want to understand how his mind works, because he is looking at so many things and he's looking so far out into the future. It's awesome.
In some ways, this externality effect or the effects on other people is a confounding variable that they use as a smokescreen to justify something that obviously they were doing anyway, because my body, my choice is...
It's very selectively applied. My body, my choice is... Go ahead.
It's first order, right? So that's an easy place to smoke out what I think is going on here. It's a kind of... So here's let's just use the FD as a case study example. It wasn't exactly what I was planning to go deep with you on today, but it doesn't matter. We can talk again another time and go deep on this today.
Yep.
So I think people miss this who share our antipathy towards the administrative state, miss the culture of that administrative state at the FDA. The people at the FDA do not believe they are there to exert surreptitious harm on the everyday citizen. In fact, it's the opposite of that. They believe that they are there to care for everyday citizens in ways that people could not be trusted to on their own. It is a form of the nanny state. And in part, we get into these discussions about the nanny state. We're usually talking about the entitlement state, the LBJ, post-LBJ Great Society, the welfare state, payments to individuals for welfare and Medicare. That's what people usually think about when they mean the nanny state. And that is certainly an important nanny state that I believe needs to be over the long run dismantled in the United States. But the regulatory state is actually a subset of the nanny state as well, designed to limit the choices that individuals are able to make, not for even the benefit of the government or the governmental actors who implement it, but for the supposed benefit of the very people who are being limited in the choices that they're able to make.
Right.
That's, I think, the conceit at the heart of the regulatory state. And so, you laid out a path, and I think what I call a series of elegant excuses, which may be grounded in truth, of why we couldn't have begun the full frontal assault on that.
I've got more.
But get to the full frontal assault. Okay, you laid the groundwork and the reasons why we haven't done it so far. But how do we actually dismantle this beast?
Excellent
and
question.
Where are we in the island hopping?
Excellent question. So I do believe in 2024 it is now feasible to do it. Okay, and so
Thank you. That's the part I want to get to.
Yeah. So how do we do it? Right. So the most important thing, I think, is, Ron Paul wrote a book, End the Fed. And I love Ron Paul, and that's a great book. But it wasn't feasible to just end the Fed. You also needed to invent Bitcoin, because you needed to have an alternative that was a technologically, socially, incentive-aligned, better alternative that got enough people to its banner under many circumstances to actually fight and replace the existing system. And I think that is the big thing that the technologist worldview, the founder worldview has, that the conservative worldview usually doesn't, which is you actually have to somehow build the alternative and then replace the existing system. And for example, as hard as that is, even for a government agency, Elon built SpaceX and he's essentially replaced NASA, right? And so to your point, and then let me get to the strategy on it. One of the things I talked about in this lecture from 10 years ago is FDA, and they omit the, right? They don't call themselves the FDA, they call themselves FDA, right? Yeah.
FDA. It's actually one of these like obnoxious
Ticks.
even conceits and ticks. Yeah, it's just
It's
you're
funny.
Right it just tells me you know the inside baseball of this, right?
Right, exactly. That's right. So FDA and SEC and FAA, they're set up for a very 20th century environment where, as you say, their whole conceit is they're protecting you from yourself. So FDA is set up to go and regulate Pfizer and Merck, and SEC is set up to regulate Goldman and Morgan, and FAA is set up to regulate Boeing and Airbus. But what FDA is not set up to do is regulate a million biohackers all taking their own health into their own hands, right? And SEC is not set up to go after a million crypto holders who all want to take their own risks. And FAA is not set up to go after a million drone hobbyists, right? So those assertions of individual liberties, which the internet has enabled in all three of those cases, right, and others I could name, are what put the lie to the idea that the regulator is protecting you. They're just protecting you from your own benefit, right?
Yeah,
and
because they prove the existence of what an alternative looks like.
Exactly, that's right. And so we can see with the SEC is protecting you from getting wealthy. We will now soon see that the FDA is protecting you from getting healthy.
I actually like that framing quite a bit.
Okay, so
they're protecting you. I mean, even when you think about that particular example of the SEC is protecting you from getting wealthy, it's just a very specific case. When I started Roivant, so this was the biopharmaceutical firm I founded back in 2014. I first started, as many people do, with the friends and family around. I did not go. It's funny your framing of the inside versus outside. I think that actually comes full circle several times around.
Sure.
I think if you're starting the biotech company, the actual normal way to go is actually just this series, fill in the blank, A, B, C, venture capital treadmill, which actually is very much the inside. I took what I thought was an outside path to building a biotech company. But
we're both in the grand scheme of things.
Framings.
Yeah,
I was just getting around. But I think it's interesting on this. I started with the friends and family around, a bunch of people who had gone to college. I'd worked at a hedge fund. I wasn't born into any kind of wealth, but had achieved enough money to put my own money into the company, put millions of my own into the seed round, and had many other friends who, by the time they were 7 or so years, by that point, 2014, 7 or so years out of college, a good number of them had achieved financial success and were able to invest, in the company as well. One of my friends, who was one of my roommates for 2 years, really wanted to do it. He didn't know the first thing about biotech, but he knew about me. And he said, okay, if you're starting this company and you're going in on it, I want to put, for him, he wanted to put, I think, something on the order of $100,000 into it.
But he wasn't
accredited. That was a lot of money for him.
He wasn't an accredited investor.
That's the thing. Yep. That's the thing. So the accredited investor law,
lost out on what,
regulations,
10x, 50x, something like that.
Oh, yeah, I mean, he would be millions of dollars. Millions of dollars. $100,000 would be today. I have to do the math, but like multiple millions of dollars.
But he could have legally gone and put all that into. He could have put that into lotto tickets, and he could have put that into Vegas.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
This is the ultimate.
All right, I started to type this out, but I'm just going to say it. Accredited investing is a joke. I used not to feel that way. I thought people needed to be protected from themselves because there's so many scammers out there. But it's really complete bullshit because you can go in the state I live in. There's like video lottery and there's places on the reservation where you can go gamble your entire life savings away, but you still can't invest in a startup that could make you rich, because you need to be accredited. Otherwise, the government worries that you're not going to be able to make the right investment choices. It's just an absolute absurdity to me, and something I've changed my stance on dramatically over the years. Accrediting investing is bullshit. It needs to go away.
Irony is, he wanted to bet on a friend who he knew. He had a better investment thesis than any other hedge fund that later came in to future rounds had, right? They didn't know me. And the number one predictor factor of the success of a business in an early stage, I believe at least, is going to be the entrepreneur who's behind it. And he had what in the investment world you'd call investment alpha. He had a unique insight that if you want to frame it in the terms of technical professional investing, he had exactly the thing that every investment firm aspires to: a deep understanding of what that business was or wasn't going to do in a way that was uncorrelated with the market. Yet he wasn't allowed to act on his own unique alpha and insight. Lost out the SEC and the relevant regulations in the securities laws protected him from getting wealthy. And I do think that is the ultimate case against the administration.
I love the way he says that protected him from getting wealthy. That is what accredited investing rules do.
Administrative state is that not that they're hurting the people who they're trying to regulate, but they're hurting the very people who they allegedly care to protect in the process.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And that's exactly what we see with the FDA as well. I mean, look at how many patients are suffering with PTSD that aren't going to have access to a therapy that they want access to, that a company in this particular case, I think it's debatable whether they should have to go through this type of elaborate multi-phase 3 testing. Say what you will. You have to get 2 phase 3 studies approved, not because the statute says so, but because the FDA says so, which is bizarre. Adds about 30% extra to the cost of the development of any drug. But this company jumped through both those hoops, and the FDA decides at the end that patients who want it, and the company is willing to sell it, that's gone through the hoops that the FDA identified, still isn't able to sell that to patients. They're, as you put it, now protecting people from becoming healthy.
Well, so it actually goes very deep. And one of the biggest things is, I think, I'm at this stage in the life cycle of this whole bureaucracy and this regime, I think it's a mistake to say that they mean to do well. They mean to do well for themselves. And what I mean by that is not financially, because money is not everybody's incentive. Somebody who is senior at FDA cares about power much more than money. And what I mean by that is, for example, somebody who's an academic and they give up a career in industry, they care about status, right, more than money. So money is not the only axis along which people can sacrifice. Some people want status, some people want power. And there's this great book by Daniel Carpenter called Reputation and Power. Have you read it or heard of it?
No.
Okay, worth reading. And the reason for it is Carpenter is basically a pro-regulatory state liberal. But to his credit, he includes enough unexpurgated quotes from the executives that he interviews that you can sort of get the real story through the quotes. Okay, it's a little bit like, imagine like in the Vietnam War when hostages were being interviewed on TV and they would blink like I'm being captured like that, and you could decode it through the Morse code, right? You can see from the quotes that Carpenter has, like he talks to Earl Robb, who is the CEO of Genentech, and Earl Robb says, the FDA owns you body and soul. They own the entire industry. When they told me to fire an executive, I fired the executive. They basically are the number one gatekeeper. Once you realize this and you hear from the executives what it actually is to operate under FDA, then you realize, like the entire pharmaceutical industry was basically gelded for like 70 years. And what isn't like that is tech. What isn't like that is finance. And so our DNA kind of coming back in is a completely new species that they haven't seen in literally generations, which is like sort of the headstrong, self-confident executive.
Right.
So I want to actually, your MDMA thing actually has like three really interesting branch points to go through. I just want to kind of touch on each of them. There's at least three areas we can touch on, which are the FDA, just what drug approval should be, and the regulatory state, right? So first, let's talk about the ideal world where FDA doesn't exist, okay? So we have a new jurisdiction, whether it's on Mars or it's in a new network state, like a new country we founded or something like that, okay? I think the first thing is to go back into history and learn about Banting and Best, okay? And you may have heard of them, Banting and Best. They came up with the idea for insulin in I think it's 1921. And then they tested it on dogs and then on themselves and then on willing patients by 1922. And then they had scale production for the entire North American continent and the Nobel Prize by 1923. Okay, so that was like a time when pharma moved at the speed of software. You can check my dates on that, but that's very close, I think, right? Let me actually double check that because I like.
No. It's good. Yeah. Okay. We'll leave it to people with the caveat. I love your precision, man.
Fine. I'm pretty sure that's right, but people can double check. The point is that they were not doing the phase 1, 2, 3, 4. That whole rigmarole is treated as if it was S&P orbitals. I know it's a technical reference, but that's from chemistry, right? Like the phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 are treated as if they're like fundamental.
It's man-made. It's not nature-made.
Exactly.
That's the point, right?
That's right. These are not fundamental constants of nature. They are bureaucratic hurdles imposed by man, and they should only be there if their benefits exceed their costs. But the thing is, if you go back to how all of these...
I love the way Balaji thinks. They should only exist if their benefits outweigh the cost. This man is just a step level higher than anybody who's listening to him.
Drugs like, that Banting and Best types developed, all the grandfather drugs that FDA included as a list is a bunch of drugs. If you go back, a lot of small molecules that FDA basically said, okay, they're fine because they were in wide use before the Pure Food and Drugs Act or the various acts that powered up FDA. There's a bunch of grandfather drugs before that point. They were not tested with double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. They were tested iteratively. And the reason I want to emphasize this is FDA...
Iteration is the most important thing you could possibly do in innovation. It's what made Elon Musk so successful, between first principles and continuous iteration in order to be able to get to the right point. I used to do project management for software companies, and I hated the waterfall implementations where you had all these deadlines and everything had to be adjusted, and you were doing agile methodology and iteration are how you advance in technology. I don't care what fucking industry you're in. And Balaji is spot on with all of his comments.
Today's FDA minimizes side effect size. It does not maximize effect size. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge difference, because minimizing side effect size, even if that's even true, by the way, because it sometimes pushes it into something where you've got really terrible drugs in other ways. What they are scared of is, their incentive structure is basically threefold. First,
they don't get hauled in front of Congress.
Exactly. That's right. So first of all, you can be blamed. Their entire industry culture or the entire agency culture is shaped by thalidomide. And the number one thing you can be is,
which for people's benefit is a drug that was previously approved that was associated with birth defects, was later removed from the market, but Europe actually was much later to the punch than the United States. And the fact that the FDA stopped U.S. harm relative to what had been seen in Europe is this classic example that every time somebody brings up a debate about the FDA, the first thing you're going to hear is thalidomide, and some guy's going to get up on a high horse and talk about that for about 2 hours and bore you to death.
Exactly. Now, here's the thing. When you actually dig into the details, Kelsey actually was just holding back all drugs, and she suspected thalidomide of having neurological issues, not teratological issues.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it was just something where it's like, if you think about it as a binary classifier.
It was very happenstance, actually. I'm glad you know the history of this. Is this sort of example that they happen to be quote unquote right for the wrong reasons anyway. Which,
yes.
If you dig into it, should not give you any confidence about the FDA's ability to actually predict what is or isn't going to be wrong in the first place. It's what Hayek called the fatal conceit.
That's right.
And I think that the FDA suffers from
They were
it.
actually
Now,
wrong on what they were
tech, we actually
analyzing.
have a analytical framework that you're also probably familiar with, the false positive and false negative rates, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is, yeah.
Okay, and so if you think of a regulator as a quote binary classifier, and this might be a little bit technical for people in the audience, but let me explain. Let's say you have a bunch of widgets coming on an assembly line, okay, and you test them. You want to see which of those widgets are good, okay, which are bad, but your test might itself be off, and so you might say that something is bad when it's good or good when it's bad. So all four possibilities are there. It's good, and your test says it's good. It's good, your test says it's bad. It's bad, and your test says it's good, and it's bad, and your test says it's bad. The problem is the FDA is not benchmarked on its true positive, true negative, false positive, and false negative rates.
Very good point.
It needs to actually be externally benchmarked on that. And how do you do that? Go ahead. This is as it relates to the problem of, go ahead.
The most interesting thing about your observation there is actually your point about the incentive structures is that they are heavily incented to protect themselves against being exposed for a case where a drug has an unintended side effect that they didn't spot because they don't participate in the upside of a positive drug that has a massive effect. But they occasionally face the personal, often very personal downside of approving a drug that had an unintended side effect. That's what their incentive structure is. But actually, just to that point, I think it's a great point you made, and I think your point about the false positives and false negatives and where the incentives lie bolsters that. Actually, in the few instances, though, where a company has taken it into its hand to publicly make sure that they create the same risk structure for those FDA officials being hauled in front of Congress for why they didn't approve a drug that patients were dying from a disease or suffering from a disease that otherwise wasn't being treated, cured, or addressed, they then respond to that incentive structure in the other direction.
Exactly.
It was the incentive structure of the bureaucracy all along, not some type of fixed point philosophy that was the right way for deciding whether or not drugs made it to market.
That's exactly right. And that's like ACT UP, for example, in the late.
That's just a really great point. The incentive structure is for them to be able to cover their own ass and not approve something in order to not have liabilities and concerns that come later. It's not to try and be accurate on the approval process and do the right thing. And as Charlie Munger used to say, I'll show you the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. You're going to get a shitty outcome where you don't approve drugs that should be approved. And again, if they're not weighting, false positives and negative, if they're not weighting both sides of this and looking at their success rate, then they're never really going to do a good job. And that's why all this bureaucratic structure needs to be cleansed.
The 80s, right? Because that was actually something that pointed in the opposite direction. For the history, for people who don't know about this, essentially, HIV/AIDS was then sweeping the gay community. And there's actually a movie that's been made on this called Dallas Buyers Club, which I recommend people watch.
It's a good movie.
It's a pretty good movie. It's actually an
in an era of not very good movies. It's a pretty good movie. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like it's not a date movie. I would
probably not.
Yeah, probably not. Not But it's a good
depends
movie.
on your date.
It depends on your date. Like it's a
could be a good sign if it were a good date movie for you.
It depends. Yes. So it depends on the kind of date. That's true. But let's just say though it's a very informative and educational movie, and it's actually as a meta point, it's unusual because it's one of very few examples in Hollywood where you have a regulator or a bureaucrat or an NGO or a journalist who's the bad guy. I can count on like one hand, right? Like Ghostbusters.
Yeah, usually they're the heroes. Oh my gosh. I mean, what was this obnoxious movie most recently? The Civil War movie. I actually went in to watch that.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was an own goal.
Watch
I did watch it. Go, give me your thoughts. I'll give you my thoughts. Go.
Yeah, we went to a movie theater, and I rarely do this.
I couldn't do it. I haven't watched this movie. Have you guys watched the Civil War movie? I basically assume that it's just a bunch of liberal crap. But have you guys seen it? Let's see what they have to say.
I rarely go to the movie theater, but having gone to the movie theater, we walked out about 20 minutes in because it didn't get into the underlying content of it all. It was just like a glorified lionization of the journalist as the person who's actually going to save the country, when in fact the journalists at issue are nothing more than a artificially deified version of a New York Times reporter today.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's funny. That movie was an unintentional own goal in my view, because
it was actually.
It revealed that the journalists were actually not neutral, but literally on one side, where they were the ones who, they were literally taking like a gore shot of the president shot at the end or whatever, right? It was clearly wish fulfillment. And go ahead.
Yeah, it was projection. It was,
Yeah.
I mean, you could almost see the thirst of what they want right now in the country.
That's right. And they projected themselves as, oh, they're the diverse and multiracial, journalists or whatever against the evil white guys in the, military and the Republicans. It was very obviously that. They didn't have the courage to actually show it be red versus blue. The reason they made it California and Texas is to make it seem like, oh, it was a president who was above democracy, so even Texas broke away. The same kind of trick they always try to pull, right? And
exactly. It was garbage.
Here in reality, as you probably, your viewers are probably aware, like, for example, Latinos have moved 41 points towards Trump. It was like 62-26 in 2020. Biden, it's like 39-34 towards Trump last I looked, right? And, other demographic groups have moved this way. So even I don't believe it legitimates someone to have a particular minority group vote for them, but Democrats do.
Yeah.
And so that has been, removed. Anyway, coming back to the stack. So go ahead.
Come back to Dallas Buyers Club, and then I actually reminded me of a topic I want to hit with you, which is what the heck is going on in the UK.
Sure.
We'll
yes.
come back to that.
All
We'll wrap this point, and we'll go to the UK.
Good. Okay. So basically, the thing about Dallas Buyers Club is it depicted a scenario where the regulator's a bad guy. Why are they the bad guy? Because they were denying life-saving drugs to people with HIV that were on death's door, people with HIV/AIDS on death's door, and they were going to die anyway. So why not let them take an experimental drug? And in fact, there were people who had, you can Google this, but if I die, bury my body on the steps of the FDA, right? Like those kinds of T-shirts and stuff. And I think somebody should make a movie about this called FDOA, FDA Dead on Arrival, right? Where essentially every drug that FDA has approved really has the same story as the HIV/AIDS debacle. The difference is that the victims are typically not unionized in the same way, right? But social media, though, they could be, okay? And what I mean by that is every time you've got a drug that is approved and then afterwards you see a decline in morbidity and mortality, well, there was a previous time when that drug manufacturer submitted it. And during that period of when it was in queue to be approved, that delta in morbidity and mortality is all on the head of FDA.
Of course.
Right?
That literally is blood. That is, you could argue, is a form of blood on your hands.
Exactly.
Right?
That's right.
During just the review period. Just the review period alone.
Just the review period.
That's
Correct.
actually an unassailable argument. Because you could say that the time before that, they would say, well, no, because uncertainty, and so you can't measure that against the fact that there was protective failures. But just the review period alone is blood on the hand of the FDA. I think it's actually a very fair framing.
Yes. Okay, I'll just continue on that point just for a second.
Yeah.
So this is what Alex Tabarrok and others have called drug lag. Okay, they've got some good papers on this. And I thought about a way for how you humanize this. What you do is you put up Google ads for people who are Googling that symptom or that condition or what have you. And often they'll have a relative or somebody who passed away during that period. Okay, when it was in review, but the drug wasn't available. And then you try to interview as many of those people as possible while they're still around. And you put their stories together. And now you've humanized that statistic where you actually have somebody whose life would have been saved if they could get that experimental drug.
I mean, that would I think that would sort of work. Here's my attitude towards like a lot of your proposed solutions, Balaji, is they're smart, they're intelligent, to almost like a fault, right? I think you are drawn to. You're not asking me for
sure. Give me your critique, and I'll give you my
criticism.
Yeah, go.
But and this is not just of this particular solution, but I think a lot of the form of your solutions in which they emerge, which I find fascinating. I'm talking to you because I find you incredibly smart and fascinating and bold. But I think the form of a lot of your solutions, I think you could even say some about the relationship between holding the Fed accountable with Bitcoin. I agree with everything you said, but you put too much on the shoulders of Bitcoin to solve the world's problems. You put too much on the shoulders of the Google ads here to solve the world's problems. You put too much on the shoulders of.
I'm not going to lie. I'm 100% with Vivek on this. 100%. It's not just Bitcoin. People get this wrong all the time in the Bitcoin world. I just want to touch on that point. They're like, oh, Bitcoin solves all the problems. It's going to be good. Bitcoin could still die. We should work hard to ensure that doesn't happen. It is not 100% foolproof. The world could change in a way, and we could be in a timeline where bad things happen and it fails. I think that probability is stupid low. Why would we want to increase that probability? You can't just look at these things as, oh, it's going to be okay, they'll solve the problems. That's not how life works.
The idea of the existence of nation-state alternatives to somehow.
And to be specific, I'm reflecting this off of what, like, lately, the political scene. People saying, oh, it doesn't matter who wins, Bitcoin will be fine, that kind of stuff. It really fucking matters. And I just want to reiterate that.
I'll fix the existence of actually what exists within the nation state. But anyway, on the point of the Google ad point, you humanize the story. The bureaucracy is actually very good at this, right? Even J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, and I think the FDA shares this in common too, is actually very good at its own PR. It's one of the things they master the most. So they'll bring back the thalidomide story times 10 in a way that the decentralized mechanism finds much tougher to compete with. In a world, at least, in which people, yes, it is a post-Elon, Twitter, and beginning of decentralized world, but still one in which the native human instinct is still to trust that which is centralized. That's why the mainstream media still has such a main impact on the direction of elections, even in a world of social media. That might be different 40 years from now than today, but that's where we are today. I want to actually bring up the counter argument to what you and I both say.
Can I poke? Can I poke for a second?
Point.
Can I just poke for a second?
No, because I mostly wanted to criticize you without giving you a chance.
Okay, fine.
I love these two guys, man.
All I'd say is I love lots of stuff you do. I would just say where you round things to 51, I'll round 51.49. I'll round them the other way. Where I'd say
I
is,
know that.
Right. We won't reform the Fed without Bitcoin. We won't be able to reform the media without social media, and we won't be able to reform, in my view, the FDA without competing jurisdictions and exit. And let me just...
I agree with all of those things, man.
Yeah.
I agree with all those things. As you said, it's the same point. You're just rounding it, putting your emphasis in a slightly different place where my focus has been.
And it's complementary, right? Like, that's why, I will just, by disposition and personality, I'm Mr. Outside. And then you can take those and you can point at them. You can say, this is working. We need to, adopt it. Like, for example, what, President Trump just did, where he said, hey, let's not sell our Bitcoin and so on. That was a good outside-inside kind of thing where, two arms kind of work in a different way. One thing I just want to say, by the way, on how to actually reform the FDA mechanistically, okay?
Yeah.
I think the crucial thing is you have to build alternative centers of power. You may know this, but maybe your viewers don't. You know the concept of harmonization?
Of course.
Okay. So viewers may not know this, but if you Google FDA harmonization, FAA harmonization, SEC harmonization, what the U.S. government wants to do is they want to take their laws that some unelected bureaucrat in Silver Spring, Maryland wrote, tenured, after 2 years, you don't know their name, but they want to take their rules, their regulations, and export them to the whole world. In much the same way, let's say a small country in Eastern Europe might use, let's say a small company uses Facebook login rather than building their own login. A small country might use FDA regulation rather than building their own regulation. And this is called harmonization.
Right.
And the reason those countries...
And the U.S. bureaucracy loves it, by the way.
The U.S. bureaucracy loves it. And actually big companies, Pfizer and Merck also love it because they get their approval in the U.S. and then they can just export it everywhere because they're all backwards compatible, right? And so there's a rationale for why government and business work together on trying to smooth out the whole world and make it just...
It's also a way that the EU gets the free ride on the U.S., by the way.
Yes.
Because then they can claim that the incremental cost of getting approved in Europe was lower, therefore the price and the reimbursement of the drug in Europe is lower. So there's a lot of just...
There's a lot of things. That's right.
Yeah.
So now, however, thanks to the fact that the reputation of the regulatory state is just cratering among a critical mass of tech and finance guys, both here and in the rest of the world, the SEC thing, just seeing Gensler... the way the bureaucracy lies has never been more obvious to a larger group of billionaires than what SEC is doing, right? All these tech founders, all these millionaires, all these venture capitalists, people who control large pools of capital, as well as people who don't control large capital but are founding the next big thing, are all seeing how the SEC lies, and they can extrapolate that to FDA and everybody else. Okay, so what does that mean concretely? How do you beat FDA? You have to have, for example, you take the existing exit paths. There's like right to try laws, which actually Trump just talked about with on the podcast he just did with Elon, or the Twitter Spaces rather, X Spaces. So right to try laws, which allow you to opt out of FDA at the state level.
Yeah.
There's right. There's
I want to say a word about this though, because this actually just goes into the story about you shed light on an important aspect of the FDA bureaucracy. Let me just use that to shed far more light. So that's considered to be one of the checks, right? President Trump signed into law the right to try legislation as well at the federal level, which gives you what it sounds like, right to try something even if the FDA has not approved it, especially for serious or life-threatening conditions. That's a particularly sympathetic case. Here's the dirty little secret in the farm industry, okay? There's an old adage. Anybody in the farm industry, as long as they're convinced they're not going to be recorded in a conversation like this one that you and I are having.
They don't want to cross FDA by using those.
We'll tell you. Yes, they tell you
FDA
there's an adage in the farm industry. It's called FDA never forgets.
Yes.
People say that.
Yes.
Regulatory guys, if FDA never forgets. And they're right about that.
Right.
Because the FDA hates the existence of the right to try legislation.
Yes.
They lobbied against it when President Trump wanted to pass it. So any company that makes its drug available to a patient knows they're going to face the wrath of the FDA, even on another product that they bring before that same FDA.
Yes.
Isn't that insane? Isn't it insane that we have a governmental organization and construct like the FDA that literally goes after companies for different products because of something they might have done with another one? This isn't the way it should be. This is why our prices are so high with prescription drugs. This is probably why our prices are so high with virtually everything with the medical system, because of the craziness with liability and the existing structures and how they work. There's so much that needs to be done and refined. It's crazy.
That is how this game is played. So the law is defenestrated in its impact.
The FDA is a jealous god that wants no others before it, right? It's literally
That's right, which means that passing these other laws that sidestep them, whether it's the FDA, we can talk about other agencies as well, is an incomplete solution at best, counterproductive at worst, because it appeases the public to make you think you have the option when you don't. Dismantling the bureaucracy is the only correct answer.
Okay, so I half agree and I half disagree, and here's why.
You want competing systems as well, of course.
Yeah. So there's right to try laws for pharmaceuticals. There's LDT regulations, which allow for
laboratory developed tests.
Laboratory developed tests. Those allow for clinical labs that are outside of the so-called 510K pathway. You don't have to get an FDA-approved device. You can go through HHS in a different pathway. For a while, I haven't tracked it recently, but there were compounding pharmaceutical laws, right, where you could have a pharmacist go and mix two drugs together and call it a new drug, right? And FDA tried to crack down on that, and I'm not sure where the status of that was, but that was a third exit pathway. A fourth example, a big one, is off-label prescription. And this is something where, because AMA, the doctors, have a strong enough lobbying group, they managed to preserve that right for doctors. But what FDA does, it cracks down on the poor pharma rep who cannot even hand a doctor a paper that says drug A could be used for purpose B. Because if so, that's off-label marketing and go directly to jail. And in fact, there were some, people who were jailed for this kind of thing, and there was a whole free speech, case about it and so on, if you recall that. And so the point is that those are like 4 examples, and there's more I can probably think of that are. And the 5th is medical tourism, like traveling outside, like Kobe going to Germany for stem cell treatment, right? So those are 5 examples of exit: right to try, LDT, the compounding pharmaceuticals if it's still open, the off-label prescription, and medical tourism that are all ways outside FDA jurisdiction where you're getting better treatments, right? And what those do is they show the presence of an alternative, and they start to build. I mean, you have a lot of venture-backed companies in some of these areas, right? Once you can make financial returns there, you start taking that aperture, you start widening it into a tunnel, and now there's a reason for it to exist. And
you take the daylight and you just crank it open, right?
That's right.
That's a different.
That's right.
That's a different road. See, and it's very different than going through the front door and just instead of taking the little ply and to the open door crack and cracking it open.
Right.
You take a jackhammer to the bureaucratic apparatus itself and just start going, which is why I ran for president.
True. And I'm glad you're doing
successful.
that.
and so you can make.
No, but you're young, and you'll do.
Sorry, thank you. All right, let me repeat all that. So the main thing I want you guys to take away from all of this is that when you have a Vivek Ramaswamy, when you have a Balaji, when you have a J.D. Vance, when you have a Robert F. Kennedy, when you have an Elon Musk, when you have a Donald Trump, when you have all these people that are pro-business, pro-innovation, and that understand the concepts of first principles and iteration and agile methodologies, we're going to see a boom in innovation in this country like we've never seen before if you vote Trump into power. Not to get too political, but that's why I'm having you watch this. Let's continue.
You'll do. We're both. I think I've got a little gray hair, but we're both reasonably young.
How old are you?
Me, I'm 44. But I'm not actually as gray as I look. I just have the beard right now. I'm actually.
I'm 47 this weekend. I feel like I look a little better than Balaji, but whatever.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, so let's just close on this because, okay, if you're cool with it, I want to talk to you again in a different conversation about the UK, about the future of the nation state, about competing views on nationalism, on your post-national vision. Let's save that for next conversation to do it justice because we spent a lot of time on the FDA, which is.
How did I forget David Sachs? Thank you, Steve. Yes, 100% David Sachs.
I think it was fun, actually.
Yeah, no, it was great.
Talk to somebody who knows as much as you do to be able to dive into this, kind of conversation we had.
And then I've got to just add to that because that's a really good point, Steve. It's not just David Sachs. It's David Friedberg. It's Shamath Palihapitiya. It's Jason. It's them as a collective and all of the other tech people that are affiliated with them that want to work towards regulation and legislation that's going to be accommodative towards business and help with innovation. It's a lot of powerful people, man. It's a long list of people that are going to be pro this organization if they get elected into power in November.
But on the administrative state, I actually see a fissure in the conservative movement right now in our respective commitments to even taking on the regulatory state. So right now, it's an interesting moment on the right. I mean, it's an easy thing you and I are probably on the same side of this. We can bash a lot of the left. You and I have done that in different contexts.
I consider myself a centrist, by the way. I'm very much a
whatever.
centrist. Yeah.
I mean,
I'm just kidding.
I think what is a right or what is a left?
Everybody is to the right of the far left. So keep going.
Yeah, we could bash Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. That's too easy.
That's too easy. Yeah.
But I think what's more interesting is there's a debate on the right now is should we succeed in winning the election? Let's say as Republicans in the United States. Is the right approach to restaff those bureaucracies with people who have a conservative outlook? Or is the right answer to actually focus on just shutting down, permanently dismantling and defenestrating those bureaucracies? And I come down on the latter side. I think that this has deep implications for what you think about the role of the government should be in setting what you might think of as industrial policy, right? It still requires a bureaucracy or decision maker to be able to decide which industries are or aren't favored. It has implications even for the debates around immigration and some other issues that I think the right is grappling with. But at the core of, I think, the future direction of the American right, certainly, is what is our level of commitment to actually dismantling that federal bureaucracy versus reconstituting it? And I think...
I mean, I'm just trying to think if that's applicable to the FDA. I hope he elaborates more on like specifically why you would dismantle versus why you would restructure with something like that. Because again, it's like, okay, if we're talking about giving people drugs and other foreign bodies into their bodies that could be harmful to them, there should be some kind of regulation that ensures that these things are protected. At least to a basic degree. So I'm curious to see what he says.
That's something that hasn't yet quite percolated to the surface, but is really brewing with, I think, some vigor, a debate beneath the surface that will define the future direction of the Republican Party. And in closing, I know somebody who's just a deep thinker. I'd love your perspective on certainly what I see as that brewing debate ahead.
Totally. So I actually do need to show a figure just to anchor this. Okay. Okay. Even if your viewers, I can see this. So basically, you see this graph, which shows
where's the graph, guys?
Organizations that have donated to Biden in 2020 versus those to Trump. Everything is blue. The only things at the bottom, NYPD and the Marines, are just slightly red. Do you see that?
There's like red specks at the bottom.
Specks at the bottom.
These giant blue bubbles at the top. Yes.
That's right. This is then a different graph, which is showing GDP in 2020, and I can get into why. But in 2020, Biden counties had 71% of GDP. Trump counties only at 29, and that's exacerbated. That's amplified since 2020. It might be 75-25 now, like a 3-to-1 advantage for blue in terms of GDP. There's an even more strong advantage in academia. I've got another graph even better than this one, but I can show you. It's like something like between 60 to 90% of professors in various disciplines are blue, and then 95% of journalists are blue. So what that means is that the power level of blue is extremely high in the U.S. They control the U.S. institutions. They control most of the money. They control.
I've got to find that tweet and post that on X. That's fucking insane. I'm just gonna back up a hair here. I'm sorry. I gotta back up. This is just nuts. This is nuts. One sec.
The Marines are just slightly red. Do you see that?
So whose employees have donated to Biden versus Trump? Woof. Look at that. Look at that. That's 2020, I believe he said, for that data. Look at that. Look at the imbalance that they have for donations. I knew it was high. This is all another completely different way of viewing it.
There's like red specks at the bottom.
Specks at the bottom.
These giant blue bubbles at the top. Yes.
That's right. This is then a different graph, which is showing
the amount of GDP produced in blue states versus red. And it makes sense. It makes sense. California is a huge producer. It's like its own country when it comes to GDP production, even though it's dropping significantly. But isn't this fascinating? So if you look here, all these levels, Democratic liberals have more power.
Showing GDP in 2020, and I can get into why. But in 2020,
so
Biden county.
Think about that same thing, too, when you're thinking about lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Think about how much money Democrats can make with the power they wield in so many different ways.
Counties had 71% of GDP. Trump counties only at 29, and that's exacerbated. That's amplified since 2020. It might be 75-25 now, like a 3-to-1 advantage for blue in terms of GDP. There's an even more strong advantage in academia. I've got another.
Martin Luther King was amazing, man. Like he was an influential person who I admire greatly. Yeah, he's a good dude. But let's keep focused on this. In academia, Democrats vastly outnumber Republicans. Look at interdisciplinary, look at social sciences and professional. Just ratio of Democrats to Republicans. Look at that. Look at that in academia. Look at how much power they have. That is insane.
Graph even better than this one, but I can show you. It's like something like between 60 to 90% of professors in various disciplines are blue, and then 95% of journalists are blue. So what that means is that.
And the 95% of journalists makes sense because we were just looking at a figure that's been shared around quite a bit, this little meme that's showing like a 89% positive reviews from traditional social media for Kamala Harris versus 89% negative. Imagine how crazy it is, how well Trump is doing right now when you have that kind of level of bias. It shows you where the water wants to flow. It shows you how organic his campaign really is, with him doing as well as he is when the polls are manipulating the data and the bias by liberal media, by academia, by GDP wealth and dollars contributed to campaigns is all leaning heavily towards the left. This is super insightful. This is why I'm going to delve into everything Balaji, because this man looks at the world through a lens like Sauron looking out over the Shire. It's just nuts.
The power level of blue is extremely high in the U.S. They control the U.S. institutions. They control most of the money. They control academia, and they control media. There are some prominent, red or like red-gray defectors, tech libertarians, and so on. There's Ackman and obviously Elon and others. But
Peter
in terms
Thiel.
of those are like heroes. Those are like your top guys. In terms of just the bulk of the troops, so to speak, right? The power level in society, blue just significantly outnumbers. If you stack up the two quote groups, who can impose whose will on the other?
No doubt.
Right? So then that gets to, your capabilities influence your strategy. A startup has to have a different strategy than Google, right? You can't run an overdog strategy as an underdog, nor vice versa. So I think the first thing is
God, he's
Republicans
brilliant.
need to think of themselves realistically as extreme underdogs. And it's actually remarkable. It's insane in some ways that they can contend for the presidency and have some control of the Supreme Court and whatnot, because all Democrats do on every level, and this is a whole talk we could go through, the blue business model is to take control of some government agency and funnel the money to Democrats. Example, the homeless industrial complex. They basically have the budgets. Go ahead.
That's a good
The
description. I'm writing
homeless
that one down, too.
industrial
Yep, good.
complex.
Homeless industrial complex. Yep.
Just like the
homeless
military industrial complex.
right, basically is something where they are. One graph will show that if you've never seen this graph before.
God,
in San
this is
Francisco,
so good.
the
Dude, I swear to God, Vivek is taking notes and being like, I need to mark these tweets so that I can use this in my next ad. This is amazing.
the budget for dealing with the homeless goes up and to the right as the number of homeless goes up and to the right.
Right.
And the reason for that is that's what they're paid for. They're paid to actually make the problem worse. And so more homeless, more budget for homeless. And so once you see this, you see it everywhere.
Show me the incentives.
Remember the California trains, the $100 billion California train?
Totally.
The whole point of
Totally.
that was to steal money.
You become
Go ahead.
addicted to the very problem you want to solve, and you have a vested interest in its continued existence.
That's exactly right. And so when you see this, I'll just
This is why, with the homelessness problem, what you should have are goals. And the better you do at accomplishing the goals of reducing the problem, the greater the potential for your own personal payout in government. Again, if you're going to have anything like this, you need to have incentive structures that are aligned with a positive outcome. You can't have an incentive structure that literally pushes the problem like, hey, we get more of a budget and we can grow as a department and we can hire and we can do this other stuff if we have more of a problem. You're always going to Band-Aid. You're never going to try and really resolve, right? Because you don't want to fix it. You want to make it maybe more easy on the homeless, but you're not going to try and fix it, right? You're not going to try and get to the root of it.
show you one more graph and then I'll just only talk it through, okay? But look at this
Brilliant.
one, right? When you see this, take a look at this. Look at this, okay? Department of Homelessness budget went from 200 million in 2016 to 1.1 billion by 2021. But the SF homeless population also skyrocketed during that time, and this is probably an undercount. Okay.
So this is actually insane because from 2016, the budget was 202 million. So it actually went up more than 5x between 2016 and 2021. But the amount of homeless population only went up about 50%. So you've increased the budget by 400% for a problem that's went up by 50. No wonder America's fucked, right? This is the stuff we have to fix.
Okay.
That's right. Of course, their justifications that they'll need it to be able to catch up,
Here's the
as
thing.
opposed to even positing the possibility of a causal relationship in the other direction.
That's right. Like you and I also are both businessmen. If you had a business that went from 200 million to 1.1 billion dollars in 5 years, that's an incredible rate of growth at that scale, right? This is a business model you would scale out everywhere,
Yeah,
and that's what they did.
that's funny.
Okay, so once you see,
And so if you wonder why every city that you're visiting, especially liberally run, has homeless people everywhere. This is a problem even in the Midwest where I live. And I'm not in Detroit. I'm not in Minneapolis. But this problem exists in every city that's got a couple, like 100,000 people in it. There's just a rampant amount of homelessness that didn't exist 10 years ago. was nothing like this 20 years ago. Why is it happening? We've got Democrats that have ran the government from a presidential standpoint for 12 out of the last 16 years. Why is this problem getting worse? And why is this Trump's fault?
Go ahead.
We're I think, unfortunately, for at least unfortunately
Sure.
for me, out of time today. I want to pick this up. Let's pick this up in the next
Pick
few
up.
weeks where
Yeah.
we talked, we foregrounded, I think, some of the elements where we mostly agree on the administrative state.
All right, I'm going to actually end it here. So this is great. They just basically talk about follow-up, and it sounds like they're going to try and do this once a week or once every 2 weeks, where they're going to just continue this dialogue and have really long conversations. I'm super excited about following up with this, guys. I will be posting. I think the level of understanding here, and just understanding what the problems are and the scope of the problems, and then some of the solutions being put out there. I think that is something that is incredibly fascinating to me, because the more we understand about all the regulation and its potential for change after this election in November, the greater the chance we have of making a lot of money off of something like Arc Genomics. That's my play. Doesn't have to be yours. But if that stock doubles, I can make 10x or close with the way the current options contracts are. And look it up yourself. I can actually, you know what? I could do it real quick. F it. We're just going to do it, right? We're here. Let's do this. Let me see what ArcG, the contract that I currently own, I've got about a little less than maybe $200,000 between all of my accounts. And let me just pull it up here. We'll look at it and we'll see, and we'll make sure I'm not talking out of my ass. We'll make sure that these figures are close, because the value of the contract, well, it says right now I'm only up 0.39%. So that is pretty indicative of the fact that I think they're still going to be cheaply priced. The ones I have are the January 2026s. Maybe June's better. You give yourself almost 2 years for these contracts. But let's see, the $50 price is my target. And I have, at least under this account, don't look at this, 1,450 contracts to buy ArcG stock at $50. So just a little bit. All right, and then I want to go, let me look over at ArcG. I got to look at something real quick. Let me pull this up, and then we'll go over this right before we end this call. So I'm looking, I think it's pretty easy for us to get to $47. I'm actually a little outside of that on the strike with this thing, but I think it plays out really well. But we're just going to look and see what we have to hit and the curve on this contract for the time that it needs to hit it. So, and then also just the price points I'm looking at. So I will probably at $35, I'll probably be maybe 30% out of this investment. Yeah, something close, 30 to 40%. You can take me at that. And then if it changes, I'll let you guys know. So if we look here at $35, if that were to happen anytime between the end of this year and the beginning of the year, like let's say that we get, Trump elected in November, and then we're heading into January, and the market is still just booming because it's very excited about him being pro-business, low taxation, all the policies that are going to be friendlier and encourage growth versus the other stuff that will be incredibly destructive. So let's say that happens, and I get over to here. So if this is up by about 32%, I make 150%. So we're at a 5x level right here. And if I've made 150%, I've made all my money back. And if I cash out 30 to 40, I've almost covered all of my initial cost, and I've got the rest of my investment sitting around. So I think that's a pretty good deal. And again, maybe you want to do June on this one. You'll get a little bit less of a return, but you'll give yourself more time. That is not a dumb idea. But I think that this is totally doable. And again, almost all my cost in this will be taken care of. Now, if the long shot happens where we get up to the 47 range, which is really what my ultimate target is, it's basically the mean reversion to this, where we had really strong levels of resistance. And you can see a little bit over here too. So once we get up to a level like that, and we start hitting the 200, then I think we start hitting resistance. That is only about 76% away from where we are right now. And if we did that, if we got up to the $47 level, and let's say that we just do that between like June, so that, again, I've got about 70 to 60% of my money still sitting inside of this thing. Not the level I have, so I'll kind of do some quick math to try and come up with these numbers. But for a 78% move, you're up, 330%, or if it happens sooner, like we were talking about January, February, you're up 572%. So you're getting about, 7x on this one. That's still not a bad number at all. But if we overshoot, If we start to go higher, that's where you get that 10x. So this is the bet, right? Like the bet is that it could go to 51 or it could overshoot the 200 moving average even just for a minute. And if it does that, then I get 10x the underlying. And again, in all, maybe it's closer to $1 million on this one based upon my investments. That's what it looks like. I'm looking for anywhere between like $500,000 and $1 million in profits off of an initial investment of about $200,000. That's what we're looking at on this one. And so that's what I'm shooting for. And again, maybe the Junes are a better opportunity right now. So if somebody is going to buy, you might want to do that instead. Let me just run the math real quickly on that one, and then we can take a look at it too. Because again, it's just because I own something doesn't mean it's the best thing right now. And you'd want to, I'm just going to choose 48. You want to actually look at, options volumes and interest to be able to gauge whether or not that's a good number. I'm going to drop this down to 1,000 because I want to kind of make it comparative in dollar amount to what I already had. And then I'll keep like the 51 inside of here. We'll just keep that. And so here's one thing I'm not including, and I'll show you this in a second. I'm saying if we only go like up to here, what if we actually go up to the golden retracement zone between now and when the expiration is in January? That's 76. That can happen. It doesn't mean it has to. And this stuff, I mean, you could lose money on these contracts. Again, they go to zero at the end if they don't reach their target. But let's say you got a 48 on this one. You spent $180,000, and we go up to that 70s range. Then the numbers get fucking stupid. So you've put $180,000 into this, and it ended up running 182% towards that 70s range where the golden retracement zone is. That's like the most likely strong level of resistance. And let's say it did that by February or March. I'm sorry, let's look here. Since I've got the June contracts, this is like February or March, but this is way out, on the way out. So like, again, if we're going out a little over a year, we're right about over here. You're getting 1,561% off of an 182% move. That's still really good. That's like a 9x. I can't hate that. Like 8.5x. This is a solid return. I actually think I like the June contracts better. And so if I was purchasing fresh, that's probably what I would be doing is getting something like that. Also, one thing I didn't do, I need to do this correctly. Because I'm looking at this as of the price of today, but I'm not looking at it. Well, I guess it doesn't matter. It's only 0.39%. Nah, it's the same. We'll just call it good. So I'll put my contract number back in here again. And I've got a little more than this because I got another account too, but I'm not looking at it right now. I just wanted to show what happens if we get to 76, that same kind of target, the golden retracement zone on this one. So you can see that you're doing, honestly, it's about the same. It's about the same. And again, with that other June contract, I haven't looked. Oh, no, we're still on June. That's why. No wonder it's about the same. All right, let me go back here. Let me go to my 50. All right, there we go. Let me get the right thing up. That'll make a difference. And let's say we get to the 76 range over here and we do it by like October or something. Did we get the right one? We did. Let's say we get it by October of next year. Well, here's what it looks like. It's stupid. It's actually over 11x. So again, you are getting a little more for that shorter time frame, but you have less time for it to play out. And some of you guys that were in 2025 contracts for a slew of different things have seen how that played out. So think accordingly about this stuff. I personally always err on the side of time. I'd rather miss a couple of X. If I can get 8.5 to 9x with those June contracts versus what I have right now, which is 11x potential on this one at that max level, that 76 level that is right up here at the golden retracement zone where we really have the key levels of resistance. So just reverting to the mean would be getting back to kind of this neckline here, right here, kind of in the middle. And where the 200 moving average is, that's like a very likely spot that we can get to is the 47. So like, again, looking over here, these aren't bad numbers. If we got to that anytime soon, anytime between now and, a year from now, you'd be up 315% off of an 81% move. That's if it takes a year. If it's earlier, it's almost 500, 600% returns at that same level. And that's where I would probably exit a lot of my contract. If I could get to in December, because things boom, and ARKG goes up 75%, and I've made 541% off of a 75% move, I think you'd be a fool not to take that $1 million in profit and allocate it towards other things. That's my take. So that's kind of how I think about this stuff. But again, I'm super excited to see Vivek and Balaji talk further. I'm super excited for the potential of what happens if Donald Trump becomes elected and we get Robert Kennedy and we get Balaji and we get Vivek and we get Elon Musk and we get, all these people coming on board to help make this all, like, just strip the bureaucracy away. I am stoked. I am super stoked, and I can't wait for it. So again, listen to brilliant people. Come back for another show when these guys are around. I'll do my part 2. Make sure you don't miss it. Make sure you like to support the channel. Comment wherever you can. Share it out. Do whatever you can to support it. You don't just have to do a membership. You don't have to pay a dime for this stuff, but definitely share it. Now, Needs55 says, Jesse, look forward to your PAGS analysis. The options are very sick for January. I am super curious about that company. I'm also curious why they were dropping 4% after earnings yesterday. I haven't gotten into any of that research yet. That is a primary objective of mine this weekend, though, is to go over PAGS. If I can do it before the weekend, I'm going to be doing that. If I could get it done, today or even into tomorrow, I'm gonna get that out to the members right away, because I am excited about that one too. I don't know if it's real, and that's the part that I need to figure out. If they have really choppy, crazy earnings, it might be problematic. But yeah, it's so low. It's so low. If the forward PE is really only 11 and maybe worse today, from them doing bad, I haven't checked them today, but just down 4% in after hours yesterday, then that opportunity just could be something amazing. And I'll throw a percent of my portfolio at an asymmetric upside opportunity. You guys know how I am. Michael Krause said, how many billions has California spent on homeless? A lot, and they're going to continue to spend more because, again, that's where the incentive structure is. Heinz N, no incentive to fix a problem when it comes money to a money flywheel. That's exactly what it is. It's a flywheel. Yep, it's absolute insanity. Albert, which website it is? Oh, is it? Which website is it? Oh, this one over here. You're talking about the options one? It's optionsprofitcalculator.com is the one I like. They've got all forms of options. The only thing I ever touched, and I made an options video where I talk about how to look at this stuff. It's Options 101. It's brilliant. You should look at it. The only one there's 2 I pay attention to: long call, long put. People do covered calls. They do spreads. They do all this other shit. I don't care about any of it. I'm a simple man. And I like to keep things simple. So that's the website, though, optionsprofitcalculator.com. Toke, hey, Jesse. Hey, dude, I'm actually getting ready to sign off. It looks like I'm up again today. I don't know how. The market must be doing all right. But I'm going to sign off here. If you haven't seen the whole video, go back and watch it from the beginning. Vivek and Balaji are brilliant people. They're going to have a bunch of follow-up sessions. I think this is something that is fascinating, and it might turn out to be very profitable in the future, to know what these men know and what they're going to try and do. Batchin, while you're at it, maybe look at PAGS because it's down big today. Yeah, no, I'm going to. That's the plan. I want to see what happened with their earnings because, we were already looking at it yesterday, and from a technical perspective, it's incredibly depressed. And if you look over here, I'll just show it real quick. It's incredibly depressed. And if this is what the benefit that you guys get, you guys who actually watch more videos, you get to understand things, I think, in greater nuance because you're finding out more than other people are finding out. But yeah, so we look over here, it's down 12%. And if you look, this is a really disasterful and I think maybe big opportunity. I've just got to figure it out. I got to figure out the timing. But if you look here, this is almost like a shoulder, a left shoulder, a head, and then maybe a right shoulder. But it's deep. It's weird. It's almost like, I can't even say that because it's just the proportions aren't right. It's probably more like a cup, and then potentially, if we go up quickly, a handle over here. And if that were to happen, the measured move alone off of that kind of move would look something like this. It would look something like this. And so it wouldn't be crazy to say the .1681 or the .618 would slow things down, or maybe it overshoots to 22 and it gets to the 200 moving average. But it's fascinating how low it is and what it could do for upside. And then I'm curious what the options contracts look like. Because from a fundamental level, this thing seems like it could totally whipsaw 50% to the upside. I need to understand the financials behind the company a little bit better. I should say the fundamentals behind the financials of the company and why they dropped really hard. Let me see real quick, though. I'm going to jump over here. I want to see what PAGS looks like today, see if we got updated earnings information. imported in overnight. So this is still showing Q1. So I got to reach out to Alejandro and see when we're going to get an update on this one, because some of the ones that are smaller don't get the same kind of update schedule when it comes to earnings. So I'll see if maybe he can manually push this one through for my analysis too. And the forward PE was broken. It's actually 11 right now, but if you look at the estimates for revenues and EPS, I mean, this is a good looking company from a lot of different levels. But I'm curious, like, it seems like we have a step down in institutional. Short interest is dropping though. You see these increased revenues. You see a lot of the metrics looking right. Still, like, dilution's less than 2%. Operating leverage looks good because, again, revenues are increasing quicker than expense. A lot of this on paper looks really, really good, but then I don't know why they took out a large amount of debt. So the question I have is why did that increase in Q1 of 2024, and what just happened in Q2 of 2024, and see if I can get some answers to those. And then I'll make that members only video, and the members will be able to benefit from it in my analysis. Hopefully you benefit. If I'm wrong about it, and it doesn't turn out well, then it's not going to be much of a benefit. But my goal is obviously to give you as good of information as I can, and hopefully with this group too. You guys check me and let me know if I'm off base and why I'm off base, so that we can make money together. Anyway, and use our collective, common sense and intelligence to be able to work smarter, not harder. All right, I love you guys. Again, thank you for everything. I'm probably going to call it right here, and then the market recap will be at 3 p.m. And thank you for everybody that's participated in this. I thought it was a great conversation, and I look forward to more of them, and I hope you guys